he did it again. And honestly, at this point, you almost have to admire the sheer audacity of how confidently wrong, how proudly corrupt, how absolutely shameless this entire operation has become. Because Donald Trump didn't just lose another legal fight. He didn't just get embarrassed in court. What happened here is so much bigger. His entire revenge machine, the thing he built his whole political identity around, the thing he sells to his base every single day, collapsed in real time. Judges didn't just push back. They tossed his hand-picked indictments. They invalidated the prosecutor he installed. They basically held up a neon sign in the middle of a federal courtroom that said, no, you cannot run the Justice Department like a personal hit squad. And let's be extremely clear about what's happening here. This wasn't some obscure procedural glitch. This wasn't a typo. This was a federal judge flat out saying that Trump's so-called prosecutor, Lindsey Halligan, wasn't legally appointed to begin with. She had no authority. None. Zero. And yet she was out here filing indictments against Trump's enemies like she was starring in some political revenge fantasy that somehow got a federal seal of approval. And the second actual real-world judges looked at it, it disintegrated on contact. The cases against James Comey and Letitia James didn't just fail, they were thrown out, tossed, wiped the moment a court took a breath and said, wait, you don't even have a valid prosecutor. What exactly are we doing here? Let that sink in. Trump's big, tough, chest-thumping, I will prosecute my enemies crusade couldn't even make it past basic legal standards. The very first time it encountered an institution that wasn't staffed by loyalists, that wasn't handpicked for obedience, that wasn't there to feed his ego, it imploded.
And this is the part where your brain tries to reconcile the absurdity. Because Trump spent months telling his supporters that he would deliver retribution, that he would go after everyone who wronged him, that he would use the Justice Department to finish the job he claimed was stolen from him. He didn't hide any of this. He said it at rallies, on camera, into microphones. He said the quiet part out loud every single time. And when he finally tried to weaponize the DOJ to make good on that promise, when he finally tried to prove that he could crush his critics with the full weight of the federal government, a judge basically said, this isn't just wrong, it's illegal. Make no mistake, Trump's retribution strategy didn't collapse because he backed down. It collapsed because he has no idea how the law actually works. He thought he could snap his fingers, install a loyalist with no proper appointment, and magically produce criminal charges against the people who upset him. He thought he could skip the entire rule of law process and jump straight to the part where he gets to brag on Truth Social about indicting the deep state. He genuinely believed he could build an entire shadow DOJ on vibes and vengeance alone. And honestly, it's pathetic, because the moment he tries to turn his threats into action, real, legal action, he hits the same brick wall. The Constitution still exists. Courts still exist. Judges still exist. Career officials inside the Justice Department, the ones who actually understand how criminal prosecutions work, still exist. And based on reporting from inside the department, those career officials were horrified. Not surprised. Horrified. They were watching indictments being drafted by someone who shouldn't have been anywhere near a prosecutorial role. They were watching a president try to run the Justice Department like a loyalty test. They were watching the kind of behavior you read about in accounts of failing democracies, and even they, after years of Trump chaos, were stunned.
And here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. If Trump had gotten away with this, if judges had just shrugged, if Halligan's indictments had been allowed to move forward, we would be living in a different country right now. We'd be living in the version of America Trump keeps trying to build, where the Justice Department isn't a guardian of the law, but a weapon he points at anyone who challenges him. He tried. He genuinely tried. He installed Halligan for one reason, to execute political retaliation. Not justice, not truth, not accountability, retaliation. And the reason the whole thing detonated is because Halligan wasn't just legally unqualified, she made basic prosecutorial mistakes, evidence mishandled, procedures ignored, grand jury issues, the kind of stuff a first-year law student could spot. But Trump didn't care. She was loyal. That was the whole hiring criteria. Not competence, not experience, loyalty. That's it. And that brings us to the real story here. Not just that the indictments were tossed, not just that the judge called out her illegitimate appointment. The real story is that this wasn't a one-off. This was the test run for Trump's revenge strategy. This was the opening move in what he openly calls his second-term agenda. And thank God, genuinely, thank God it got stopped early, because if this had succeeded, it would have set the precedent for everything that comes next.
But of course, here's the irony. As this entire thing collapses, Trump is still out there pretending it's all part of some brilliant plan. He's ranting about woke judges, about deep state sabotage, about rigged courts. He's blaming everyone except the one person responsible for this train wreck, himself, because he picked Halligan. He empowered her. He told her, implicitly or explicitly, to go after Comey and Letitia James. He created the scenario that led to this legal faceplant. And now that courts have called it what it is, illegal, incompetent, unconstitutional, he's back to playing the victim.
And if you're watching this and feeling like you're taking crazy pills, you are not alone. Because the judge didn't say, this is bad optics. The judge didn't say, this is politically questionable. The judge said Halligan had no legal authority at all to bring these cases. None. Meaning, these indictments were never real to begin with. They were theater. They were props in Trump's revenge fantasy, only now the lights have come up and the audience can see the wires. But wait, it gets worse. Because once these cases collapsed, new reporting revealed something even more disturbing. This wasn't the end of Trump's retribution push, it was the beginning. While the DOJ cases fell apart, Trump's team was simultaneously building what the New York Times called a whole-of-government retaliation apparatus. That means using federal agencies, regulatory power, funding decisions, and internal investigations to go after hundreds, yes, literally hundreds, of perceived opponents. Reuters confirmed the number 470 targets. Let that sink in. 470 people, organizations and institutions, media outlets, state officials, civil servants, military leaders, prosecutors, law firms singled out for retaliation. That's not politics. That's not draining the swamp. That's a president using the federal government as a weapon against anyone who challenges him. And the only reason this didn't escalate even further is because courts, actual independent judges, not political appointees, stepped in and said the quiet part out loud. This is unconstitutional. That's what we know so far. And that brings us into the next phase. How did we get here? Why did Trump think he could get away with it? Who enabled it? And what does the collapse of these indictments actually tell us about the state of American democracy right now? We go deeper.
So let's break down exactly how we got here, because none of this happened in a vacuum, and none of it was an accident. Trump didn't wake up one morning, discover that a federal judge had torched his indictments, and think, wow, what an unexpected setback. No, this was the inevitable outcome of a plan that was built on shortcuts, loyalty tests, and a complete disregard for anything resembling legality. And the forensic evidence is brutal. Start with Lindsey Halligan. Most Americans had never heard her name. She wasn't a respected federal prosecutor. She wasn't someone with decades of experience handling complex criminal cases. She wasn't even on the short list of qualified names recommended internally by the DOJ. She was an outsider, elevated not for her credentials, but for one thing. She was loyal to Trump. Not the Constitution, not the rule of law, Trump. And the minute she walked into her role as interim U.S. attorney, without a proper appointment, without the necessary statutory basis, without the internal support, she started doing exactly what Trump wanted, filing indictments against his political opponents. Not because there was new evidence, not because there were credible charges, but because Comey and Letitia James had crossed Trump. Comey by refusing to play along with the loyalty pledge. Letitia James by bringing the civil fraud case Trump still pretends he won, even after being fined hundreds of millions of dollars. So Halligan files these indictments, and what happens? Immediately, career prosecutors inside DOJ raise alarms. They know something is wrong. They know the appointment doesn't meet legal requirements. They know grand jury procedure is being mishandled. You have DOJ veterans who spent their lives protecting the institutional integrity of the department, suddenly watching indictments appear out of nowhere with glaring procedural defects. And they're asking the same question the judge eventually asked: who actually authorized any of this?
And here's where it becomes almost darkly comedic, because when the indictments reach federal court, the defense attorneys take one look at the paperwork and realize this is amateur hour. They file a motion to dismiss based on the illegitimacy of Halligan's appointment. And when the judge reviews it, he doesn't say, well, this is a minor technicality, we can work around it. No,
He says, in effect, this prosecutor has no authority. This entire prosecution is void. Think about how extraordinary that is. Judges don't toss indictments lightly. They don't call out prosecutors unless they have absolutely no choice. And here, the judge made it unambiguous. Halligan's appointment circumvented the law. She wasn't validly in the job. And because she wasn't validly in the job, everything she touched was contaminated. The charges against Comey? Contaminated. The charges against Letitia James? Contaminated. The supposed grand jury evidence? Contaminated. The entire operation dead on arrival. And Trump's team didn't even try to hide the motivation. They weren't shy about why these indictments existed. They were revenge, pure and simple. Even the language used internally made it clear these weren't neutral legal decisions. They were political payback, dressed as criminal prosecutions. Now, normally, a president who faces a courtroom humiliation of this magnitude would step back, reassess, and maybe, just maybe, realize that running the DOJ like a personal hit squad is not a sustainable strategy. But Trump's response? He doubled down. He attacked the judge. He raged about the deep state. He insisted that Comey and Letitia James were guilty no matter what the dismissal said. He didn't even acknowledge the core issue. His prosecutor had no legal authority to prosecute anything. And that tells you everything you need to know about Trump's mentality. He truly believes that legality is optional. He believes rules exist to restrict other people, not him. He believes that the justice system should bend to his will, even when it contradicts the Constitution.
But here's the forensic detail that should worry every American. The only reason we know how badly Halligan's operation violated the law is because the indictments reached a courtroom before Trump could restructure the DOJ fully around loyalists. If this exact scenario played out after Trump had purged more officials, after he had installed more obedient appointees, after he had leaned harder on judges or replaced them where possible, these indictments might have advanced. Halligan's incompetence didn't save the day. The Constitution did, this time. And now let's talk about the sheer scale of Trump's retaliation network, because the collapse of these indictments wasn't an isolated event. It was the first visible piece of a much bigger structure. Reuters uncovered that Trump's administration had already targeted 470 individuals and institutions for retaliation. 470. Name one democracy where a leader compiles a list that large of perceived enemies and uses the state to undermine them, and we'll talk about how normal this is. Spoiler, you can't, because it isn't. This is the behavior of leaders who don't believe in institutions, only in loyalty. And while Halligan was playing prosecutor without authority, Trump's team was exploring other levers: federal grants, regulatory oversight, internal agency investigations, budget cuts, and personnel purges. You think the Comey and Letitia James indictments were alarming? They were the most obvious examples because they were criminal cases. But in the shadows, dozens of agencies were being nudged or pressured to punish people Trump didn't like. Universities were investigated for woke programs. Journalists were scrutinized for bias. Civil servants were flagged for insubordination. Military officials were targeted for being disloyal. Not disciplined, not criticized, targeted. The whole of government retaliation framework the New York Times described wasn't theoretical. It was already happening. The DOJ cases just happened to be the only ones incompetent enough to blow up publicly first.
And the fact that they blew up tells you something crucial. Trump's operation is only as effective as the people he installs to carry it out. When he chooses loyalists with no qualifications, like Halligan, the plan collapses. When he chooses loyalists who are competent, the plan becomes much more dangerous. Halligan failed not because Trump's strategy was flawed, but because she was sloppy. Imagine what happens when Trump finds someone who isn't. This is the forensic reality. This wasn't a legal defeat. It was a warning flare. An early one. A lucky one. If this had occurred even 6 months later, Trump's retribution strategy might have been much more entrenched, much more insulated, and much harder to detect. And that's why this moment matters, because it exposed the blueprint. A president installs an invalid prosecutor. That prosecutor indicts political enemies. The court stops it, but only because the sloppiness was too obvious to ignore. And behind the scenes, the retaliation network continues expanding anyway. That's phase 1 of this story. The evidence, the facts, the receipts, the documented failures, the judicial rulings, the unmistakable abuse of power. Now it's time to zoom out. Because this isn't the first time Trump has tried this. It wasn't the second. It wasn't the 10th. This is a pattern, a long-standing, deeply dangerous pattern. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. And here's the thing you have to understand. What just happened with Halligan, with the Comey indictment, with the Letitia James indictment, none of this is new. This isn't an aberration. This is Trump on autopilot. This is who he has always been. The only difference now is scale. The only difference is that he's gotten more reckless, more brazen, and more convinced that he's untouchable. If you go back and trace his behavior from the moment he entered public life, you'll see the same worldview playing out over and over again. Loyalty above truth, vengeance above law, personal grievance above national interest.
He did it with James Comey the first time when Comey wouldn't pledge loyalty. Trump fired him, not for performance, not for policy disagreement, for disloyalty. He said it himself. He said he wanted loyal people in law enforcement. This isn't subtle. He said it in front of cameras. He said the quiet part louder than anyone expected, and then he acted on it. And we all remember the reaction. Shock, outrage, analysis pieces in every major outlet. But here's the crucial detail we missed back then. Trump walked away from that moment convinced that nothing would stop him. Then it was the Mueller investigation. Every witness, every prosecutor, every attorney who did their job and didn't bow to Trump instantly became the enemy. Jeff Sessions recused himself because he had to. Trump never forgave him. He said Sessions should protect him. Protect him from what? Lawful investigation, evidence, accountability. Trump wasn't angry about wrongdoing. He was angry that someone he appointed wasn't willing to break the rules for him. Then came the Ukraine incident. Trump didn't ask for help with policy. He didn't ask for cooperation. He asked for a foreign government to dig up dirt on his political opponent. And the moment people inside the government said this crosses a line, he attacked them too, not because they were wrong, because they broke the loyalty code. And then January 6th, he didn't call the military, he didn't call the police, he didn't call off the mob, but he did make phone calls to lawmakers telling them not to certify the election. He did tweet that Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what? Violate the Constitution. Again, loyalty above law. Every time. And it keeps escalating because Trump learns one lesson from every scandal. If there's no immediate consequence, then the behavior must be acceptable. If he fires someone illegally and doesn't go to jail, he concludes the firing was justified. If he pressures a foreign leader and isn't removed from office, he concludes the pressure was legitimate. If he incites a mob and avoids conviction, he concludes the mob was righteous. This is a man who builds his worldview out of whatever he wasn't punished for. So of course he tried to install an illegitimate prosecutor. Of course he tried to file bogus indictments against political opponents. Of course he tried to use the DOJ as a personal weapon. Why wouldn't he? Every past attempt at bending the system taught him that the guardrails are weak, that accountability is inconsistent, that institutions will bark but rarely bite. This collapse in court wasn't a surprise to anyone who's been paying attention, because this is exactly what happens when someone who's been rewarded for breaking the rules finally runs into someone who tells him no. Trump has spent years surrounded by people who say, yes, yes, sir, yes, Mr. President, yes, we can do that, yes, we will try. And the second he encounters someone who has an obligation to the Constitution instead of him, everything falls apart. But here's the darker part of the pattern. Trump doesn't learn from getting stopped. He learns to avoid the people who stopped him. Every time a judge blocks him, he searches for a new judge. Every time the DOJ resists, he replaces DOJ leadership. Every time someone warns that something is illegal, he finds someone else who will swear it's legal. He cycles through lawyers like disposable cups because he's not looking for legal advice, he's looking for permission.
And that's what makes this pattern so dangerous, because the next time he tries something like this, and there will be a next time, it won't be Lindsey Halligan. It won't be someone inexperienced. It won't be someone sloppy. After this embarrassment, Trump will look for someone who knows how to make illegitimate decisions look legitimate. Someone who knows how to operate within the gray zones of law. Someone who knows how to manipulate procedure. Someone who won't make the rookie mistakes that blew the Halligan cases wide open. This is why the Reuters reporting matters so much. It's not just the number, 470
trendy targets. It's the escalation. Trump didn't stop at the DOJ. He started using federal agencies as tools of retaliation. Career officials flagged for disloyalty, military officers targeted for woke ideology, universities investigated for political reasons, journalists labeled as enemies, federal funds redirected to punish political opponents. This isn't theoretical. This isn't hypothetical. This has already happened. He didn't limit himself to prosecutors. He went after state officials who certified elections, public health officials who contradicted him, military leaders who refused to deploy troops against American citizens. He even targeted private companies. A president using regulatory power to punish companies based on whether they compliment him or criticize him is not a president. It's an autocrat in training. Every step is predictable. Every move follows the same logic. Every escalation becomes the new baseline. Loyalty test. Punish dissent. Install loyalist. Punish again. Replace the ones who object. Punish harder. Find new targets. Punish them too. Deny wrongdoing. Blame the deep state. Repeat. And then the most disturbing part. His supporters cheer this. They call it strength. They call it draining the swamp. They call it finally fighting back. They don't realize or don't care that Trump is not cleaning up government. He's purging it. He's not reforming institutions. He's weaponizing them. He's not exposing corruption. He's creating it.
And that's the continuity between the Comey firing, the Ukraine scandal, the January 6th plot, and this moment with the Halligan indictments. It's not a series of isolated events. It's one long line, a progression, a blueprint. And every time he pushes the system and the system doesn't push back hard enough, he takes that as permission to go further. The collapse of the Halligan cases is a rare moment where the system actually pushed back hard, not softly, not gently, but decisively. A judge said, no, this is unconstitutional. And that is exactly why Trump will try to prevent judges like that from having power over him in the future. This is not incompetence. This is not chaos. This is not him not knowing better. It's a strategy. And the collapse of these indictments doesn't stop the strategy. It only redirects it. And now comes the question that matters more than all of this. What happens when the guardrails weaken? What happens if the people who stopped him this time aren't there next time? What happens when a system built on norms meets a man who sees norms as weaknesses? That's the endgame we have to talk about. And here's where the stakes become impossible to ignore. Because if you look at everything that happened, the illegitimate appointment, the bogus indictments, the judge shutting the whole thing down, this isn't just a story about something Trump tried and failed to do. It's a preview of what he'll try again, but smarter, faster, and with people who know exactly how to bend the system without getting caught.
That's why this collapse should terrify you. Not because Trump was stopped, but because he'll learn from the failure. He always does. Every time he hits a wall, he doesn't rethink the behavior, he looks for a way around the wall. Every time someone says no, he finds someone else who will say yes. And every time he suffers a legal defeat, he responds by searching for new ways to eliminate the people who caused it. The judge who dismissed Halligan's indictments? You think Trump is brushing that off? No, he's filing it away as a reminder. Independent judges are obstacles. Career prosecutors who question legality? Obstacles. DOJ officials who protect the rule of law? Obstacles. Anyone who believes they have a duty to the Constitution instead of to him personally is an obstacle. And Trump doesn't negotiate with obstacles. He removes them. That's why the whole of government retaliation framework matters so much. Trump doesn't just use the DOJ for revenge. He uses everything. Agencies, budgets, appointments, investigations. He understands something dangerous. You don't need one big coup if you can instead break institutions piece by piece until they serve only you. That's the strategy. Flood government with loyalists. Purge the people who resist, then act shocked when anyone calls it authoritarian. And here's the uncomfortable part. The only reason this specific scheme collapsed is because it was sloppy. The prosecutor wasn't legally appointed, the indictments were rushed, the defects were obvious. But what happens when the next loyalist is competent? What happens when Trump surrounds himself not with amateurs, but with skilled operators who know how to weaponize government quietly, surgically, and legally quickly enough to withstand early challenges. You don't need to imagine it. We've seen pieces of it already. The pressure campaigns against state officials who certified elections, the schemes to replace electors, the plan to seize voting machines, the effort to strong-arm DOJ leaders into signing letters validating false claims. None of those were impulsive. They were organized. They were coordinated. They were methodical.
And they almost worked. That's the part people forget. January 6th failed by inches. The pressure scheme on DOJ failed by inches. The fake electors plot failed by inches. And now this retribution prosecution scheme failed by inches. You don't get unlimited inches. That's the danger. Trump's pattern isn't random chaos. It's iterative escalation. Every failed attempt becomes a roadmap for a better attempt. Every limit he hits becomes a target to remove later. Every independent actor becomes someone he vows to replace with a loyalist. And if he succeeds, the next Halligan won't be invalid. The next indictment won't be tossed. The next retaliation won't be so sloppy that a judge can catch it. That's the future we're staring at if this goes unchecked. A system that looks like democracy on paper, but in practice, a government run by vengeance, intimidation, and loyalty tests. And the collapse of these indictments isn't the end of that story. It's the warning shot.